Welcome back. Welcome home. Welcome here to this beautiful sanctuary that houses the Keene Unitarian Universalist congregation when at worship, or when doing the business of our community at our annual meeting in June. It has been the setting for many concerts, scores and scores of child dedications, wedding ceremonies, and memorial services. There have been brilliant sermons preached here, loving words and hard words and wake up, people words also spoken. Tears have been shed, laughter has arisen, basses have boomed, and sopranos set shivers of notes to free the pent-up joys and sorrows from the hearts of young and old. I am the Reverend Michael F. Hall, minister to the good people who usually gather here, although today only a few of us gather as we assemble virtual worship for the people of KUUC. Today, our pulpit address will be delivered by longtime KUUC member and historian Jim Smart, who literally wrote the book on this church building in which we worship today. Dr. Smart will deliver part 2 of his series on the legendary Unitarian minister, Theodore Parker. Welcome to Unitarian Universalism in the very heart of the Monadnock region. Welcome to the faith of a free people, a loving and learning people, learning, as James Luther Adams long ago said, to be human religiously. Our opening words are called "Into the House of Light We Come" by Van Ogden Voigt. Into this house of light we come, to seek that which is just and to find that which is good. And here we remember those whose lives are darkened by the greed and wrong of others. We have not purged the commerce of our times of those harsh ways that thwart the hopes and dreams of the many. In this house of peace, we remember wars and rumors of wars. We have made but feeble effort to understand the peoples of the world and to foster peace among the nations. In this house of joy, we remember all sorrowing and troubled folk. Let us here be gathered into a common power of goodwill, which shall issue in lasting peace and larger right. Our chalice lighting this morning is actually from a colleague who I went to divinity school with, Jennifer Grayson. And I invite Jim Smart up to light our chalice as I read Jen's words. We light this chalice, symbol of our purpose to bring more love and justice into the world. We light this chalice knowing our congregation as a church dispersed across communities, not bound by walls, but connected through the web of life. It seems strange sometimes to do this part of the service with so few people here, but it is important nonetheless that we, at least virtually and symbolically, pass around our baskets for the good work of this church needs to continue in times of COVID, as it will when we return finally together again. Now is the time for our offering. Give what you will for the church that means so much to you, for the church that meant so much to those who came before you, and for the church that will mean so much to people you will never know. Give what you will, for you are a generous people. We have a special offertory today. It's hymn number 324, "Where My Free Spirit Onward Leads." Please rise as you're able in body and spirit and join me in singing hymn number 324. Let us now settle into the quietness of the morning light and free our minds from the brutish cacophony of this fitful and fact-denying age. Let us find our way to the truths we hold most dear, the truth that lights our way, the truth that speaks with confidence and sometimes despite our fears. We are well to remember in the quiet that follows these words of Theodore Parker. Truth never yet fell dead in the streets. It has such affinity with the soul of man. The seed, however broadcast, will catch somewhere and produce its hundredfold. Let us now share a moment's peace. Blessed be, and blessed are we. Theodore Parker is a legendary Unitarian minister, transcendentalist, polyglot. He was a lot of things. And one of them was ahead of his time. This reading is from a sermon that Reverend Parker preached about women. If woman is a human being, first, she has the nature of a human being. Next, she has the right of a human being. Third, she has the duty of a human being. The nature is the capacity to possess, to use, to develop, and to enjoy every human faculty. The right is the right to enjoy, develop, and use every human faculty. And the duty is to make use of the right and make her human nature human history. She is here to develop her human nature, enjoy her human rights, perform her human duty. Womankind is to do this for herself as much as mankind for himself. A woman has the same human nature that a man has, the same human rights to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, the same human duties, and they are as unalienable in a woman as in a man. That was from his sermon of the ideal public function of woman. Now, if you'll join us in singing our interlude, another hymn, Bring Past Your Honor, number 290. Our second reading is also, of course, by Theodore Parker, and I think it's one we can all relate to. The books which help you most are those which make you think the most. The hardest way of learning is by easy reading, but a great book that comes from a great thinker. It is a ship of thought, deep freighted with truth and with beauty.
Well, hello everybody, and glad to be back up here and finish my comments on Theodore Parker. So, excuse me. So why did I pick Theodore Parker to talk about in the first place? Well, he represents two of our principles, principles of 7 that Unitarians have. Unitarians haven't done away completely with the 10 Commandments, but we have now made the 7 principles our guide for life. And of these 7, 2, the responsible search for truth and meaning applies particularly to Theodore Parker, and I talked mostly about that in my first talk when he tried with major scholastic effort to get to the true nature, at least according to him, of Jesus. And he stayed on that theme for about 7 or 8 years and never did give it up. He regarded Jesus as totally human. And so today's talk really applies more to our first principle, the worth and dignity of every person. So, but I want to one reason Parker appealed to me is the fourth principle, I think, is the hardest of all the principles because it tells each of us to find our own truth and to respect each other's truth. And I've had difficulty with that myself with our own denomination, particularly in regards to Israel and Palestine. Our denomination is fully committed to Israel, has never criticized it as far as I know, and done nothing to support people who want to do more for the Palestinians. So this particular principle, I have to respect those in our denomination who disagree with me, who support Israel. And they have to do so with me and put up with me. And this is the same situation, see, that Parker was in, even though there were no principles in then at that time. He was, the same situation. Other ministers had to put up with him, and he with them. And they did so with some good spots and some very rough spots. And this will continue now in his next version of his life when he's devoted to the anti-slavery movement. So, how did Parker switch from his interest in Jesus to anti-slavery? Did he say, well, I've talked about Jesus now for 7 or 8 years, that's enough. What'll I do next? Look around, see what's going on. Well, hardly. Like most of us who get excited, teed off, it was the news of the day that got him started. And the news of the day was that James K. Polk, as president, was going to lead the country into war with Mexico one way or another. And of course, if you want war, you can always find a good excuse for it. And so a good excuse was found also for the war with Mexico when we claimed that a Mexican had shot an American on our soil, which wasn't our soil at all. It was disputed soil, but anyhow, that's where we went to war. And the war was tremendously successful. It was brief, and we gained 1 million square miles, unheard of almost, of new territory from Texas to California. And it's a third of the United States today is what was gotten in this war. And so the question was, are there going to be slave states or free states? And how many? And so the country got itself involved in this fight, really, of free versus slave states in the new territories. And and historians today think that very likely at this time, which would be about 1848, 49, 50, the country would have gone to war. And war was very much in the minds of men, and it's very kind of traditional for, after a war, to have a civil war in a fight over the booty of the war. And the booty is so great, see, and the issue is so great. And this is as old as time, as a fight for booty after conquering somebody. And so this was particularly important because historians also think, had we gone to war in 1850, the South would surely not have been defeated. It may not have defeated the North, but the North would not have defeated the South either, and the South would have attained its own goal of its own independence. And what changed the tide, really, in the next 10 years was the railroad, because the North could use the railroad, and there were enough in the South that it could use the railroads to transfer large groups of men in a matter of 2 or 3 days instead of 2 or 3 weeks. And so with this, the North certainly got the upper hand in those next 10 years. So, to avoid war, then, 3 senators, one from the North, Daniel Webster of New Hampshire, now of Massachusetts, and John C. Calhoun of South Carolina, and Henry Clay of Kentucky. They put together the compromise. And the compromise was, instead of 5 states made in Texas, which could have been 5 slave states, there would be only 1 state of Texas. And California, which is also large, could have been made 5 free states. But California would be only one state, and that's one reason today they're such big states, because of this compromise. And so that would add only one more free state and one more slave state, and the balance would remain the same. And the same was true with Kansas and Nebraska. But the price was that the North had to guarantee the South that it would return escaped slaves. Now, the Underground Railroad is still famous, nice thing to talk about. It's dramatic, it's romantic. It really wasn't as effective as often made out to be. Nonetheless, it was enough so that the rumor, the talk of it, made it real. And there were slaves that were actually using this underground system to get to freedom. And it had to be stopped because the idea of it was too damaging. And so the compromise worked out by these three men said, yes, the North will return the escaped slaves. And so for 3 months there was celebration. Daniel Webster was considered a hero because war had been averted. So it seemed then that the country could relax again. But who should now step into the scene but our own Theodore Parker? And he had been talking for a couple years now against slavery, had given his first anti-slavery talk in 1847, had given it in Faneuil Hall, and it was considered so inflammatory then he was practically stoned and run out of the hall, even in Boston. But he kept at it, and I say 3 months after the compromise then, he decides to make a public demonstration against the compromise. And so he has a public wedding of William and Ellen Craft. They were both escaped. They had been living as man and wife. And so he is now going to invite key people in Boston, anti-slavery people and other dignitaries that he had chosen, and make a big public wedding ceremony, inviting public people to it, and formally unite this man and woman in marriage. And then after the marriage ceremony, there was a gift ceremony with all sermons and stuff with that too. And with the gift, of course, was a Bible. And after the Bible came a Bowie knife. And what size, I don't know, but Bowie knives were considered frontier weapons, and they varied in size from 5 to 12 inches. So how big a one he got, I don't know. And a pistol. And then open up another present, another pistol. And so he is, provoking. He is starting a new movement, really. He really is. And it will dominate the whole decade of this anti-slavery movement. And he is the one who started it. And he, so at this first with this public wedding. You can imagine, what did other ministers think? What did other Unitarian ministers think? He's crazy, he's crazy. You know, we averted a war, and he's now starting things up again. And so there was no violence after any of this. William and Ellen were united and then went off to Canada. William became a minister himself and lived in Canada for the next 8 or 10 years. And then he died there. So that was in 52. And the next year was the Thomas Sims case. And Thomas Sims was also a slave who had escaped from the South and come to Boston. And by this time, Parker had formed a transient committee, and which they called themselves a vigilante or vigilance committee. And see, as now slaves were pushing to come north. And so when they would get to Boston, anyhow, I don't know about the other cities, what they did. But when this vigilance committee, which he gathered together about nearly 60 people, and they would, when they heard about a new arrival, see, then they would contact each other as to who was going to put them up and who wasn't. And and Parker was the one actually who put up William Craft, and it was in this famous reference to Parker. He had and gave him the gun, and Parker has often been cited as writing his sermons with a gun on his desk, and that came from the first case of Craft, where there was a fear now, see, of vigilantes who would go out and capture a black person, and they could get then a reward, immediate reward, $300. And so it pitted, say, roughs and toughs and all kinds of people who could make a quick $300 versus Parker and his vigilance committee, who were more respectable. But there was this fight between the two. And so with Sims, then, it was this, all this is in background. So anyhow, with Sims, the authorities got him and told him he was under arrest and put him in a downtown hotel with a guard until he would be judged and then sent back. Well, Parker and his committee all got together by courier and whatever means, and they all went and he got 60 people to go down to the hotel, and they went in there and they demanded that the proprietor of the hotel release this prisoner. And of course, the poor proprietor, you can imagine, never having experienced anything like this in his life, said, sure. And so Sims was released, and he got sent off to Canada himself without any problem. So that was a victory in that sense. The next case, however, was the case that made Parker truly famous, and as a success it wasn't, but as a success in making it famous, it was. What happened was Anthony Burns, now another escaped slave, who had come up in the hold of a ship 3 days with hardly anything to eat, but anyhow he was welcomed and fed and everything when he got here. And so when it was known then that Burns had been rescued by this committee, then the state people started getting ready to, there would not be a repeat of Sims. See, there would be more muscle and force to rescue Burns. And so when this was cooking, Parker and the Vigilance Committee met, and for some reason, which the biographers I've read don't quite get themselves, the committee couldn't agree what to do. So they agreed, finally, when that happens, you often agree to postpone. So that's what they did. They agreed to postpone till a day after, on Saturday at 9 o'clock. And that was a fatal mistake for their part. What they should have done was to do like they did with Sims, go down and demand release and so on. But they couldn't get together. In the meantime, then, Franklin Pierce, our noble president from New Hampshire, who was a pro-slavery president and very unpopular until the local college guy who didn't know anything about Pierce decided to call the college after Pierce. But otherwise, Pierce had been very unpopular in New Hampshire up until 1956 or something like that. Said he would spare no expense, but Burns had to be returned. And so by Parker's delay in that period, the government was able to get 3,000 units of volunteers, of other military groups together. And thus, with that, in Boston, Parker and his Vigilant Committee still tried to crash the judicial hearing, but they couldn't do it. There was way too few of them, too many police, but there was a scuffle and one man killed, a policeman actually, an Irish policeman, and Parker will often be blamed for his death. But at any rate, Parker, despite this scuffle, Parker and his group could not get in to release Burns. They did appear at the hearing. They held the hearing at a time when Parker did not know of it. So the hearing of Burns was already taking place, and Parker and several of his group, Higginson and forget some of the others who came in when the judge is listening to the case against Burns. And they said, "No, don't say anything. Don't say anything. You need counsel. You need counsel." Just barged in. They wouldn't stay quiet or anything. So the judge did allow him counsel. But nonetheless, Burns, his master, his former owner, was there. And he said, Anthony wasn't I always good to you? Didn't I pay you? And Anthony said, yes, sir, you paid me 12.5 cents every year. And with that was the admission, the public admission that he belonged to William Sutler, the Virginian who owned him. And so that was a shut case. And so with that then, they decided to send Burns back, which they did. And in the meantime, Parker then roused all his people, and they still a minority, but they made a big impression. They hung black cloth out of their windows. They dressed in black. They went around mourning this loss of a human being to back to slavery. Just incidentally, when he got back, he was sold by good people to free. He was sold several times again, and he eventually did get his freedom. Someone gave enough money to just buy his freedom. That's what happened to him. So all this took about 2 or 3 weeks' time. And Parker is in the news, see, all the time. And by now, though, things have changed. Things have changed. When he did the crafts, he was the bad guy. He started things. In just 2 years of agitation and so on, the country will begin to switch. And Parker becomes the most noted guy in the United States. Well, not the most. Actually, who was first in the United States was Harriet Beecher Stowe, see, who had written Uncle Tom's Cabin. And next was Horace Greeley, the editor of the New York Tribune, the best paper I think the United States has ever had. Anyhow, he was, people always read Horace. And third was Theodore Parker. And he was receiving so many invitations, he could only accept 1 out of every 3. And he was preaching 50 to 60 times a year, while at the same time he was preaching in his new congregation, the 28th Congregational that I talked about last time, in Boston, and his old home parish in the afternoons on Sunday at West Roxbury. Just a tremendous schedule, while at the same time he continues his research, the research he always loved. He knew more about slavery than anybody, even more than John Calhoun. He knew every time slavery was mentioned in the Bible. He knew when the Bible translators translated servant instead of slavery. He could cite every instance. He had this remarkable ability to research and to remember. And so all this made him exceptionally popular. So as a speaker. So now enter also John Brown, whom we started with at the beginning of our first sermon, first talk. I don't know if I'm doing sermonizing or talking, preaching. I don't know. So what? Anyhow, so John Brown. So see, the situation in Kansas was would Kansas be free or slave? And so the South sent its settlers in as slave settlers, and the North, and Brown being one of them, would go to Kansas and be the Free State settlers. And they came into physical contact, to not only physical but military or gun gun shooting, knife wielding killings. And John Brown participated in 3 of these that were noteworthy. One, which is most infamous, was he killed 6 people, 1 woman, 5 men, in one home who were basically doing nothing. They were pro-slavery people. He did it because the pro-slavery people had done something very similar to the northern settlers. And it was just a retaliatory raid. But it was gruesome and it was pretty awful. And then he fought 2 others where he was fighting other people with guns and so on. So, and of course if you remember pictures of him or if you've seen him, he's a real tall, upright guy and had a big brimmed hat, buckskin clothes, wearing a pistol on his leg or a knife all the time. And so he's now in Boston looking for money to arm his men so that Kansas can be made secure for the Free State Party. And so you can imagine what people think of Parker at this time. Here there is this wild-eyed guy with a pistol or a knife strapped to his legs walking downtown with a proper-looking minister on his arm. You know, it's a sort of a shocking thing in a way. But Parker knew, and his associates, the 6 men that I talked about before, the so-called Secret Six. Now these Secret Six never met. They never had a meeting. They were just 6 fairly wealthy Bostonians who guaranteed Parker money. And they aren't popular at all till the trial of Brown later on when all this comes out. But anyhow, at this time, Parker gave $252, which Brown didn't think was very much and really wasn't that much. But he did get a good bit of money from meeting a number of Bostonians. And then he goes back to Kansas then and with this money to rearm his people. So Parker kept in touch with him as much as he could. No one knew what his plans were. He was a bit fluky, of course, but he kept in touch. And at this time, it's when Parker is so overwhelmed with invitations to preach that, and while he is, as I say, preaching, he's also researching. He's also doing his work as a minister. And it just got to him. One time he got up to preach and something happened. He just couldn't go on. And so it was the first signs of tuberculosis. And so after this, he had to cut back. By now it is 1858, and he recovers, he does some more work, but by the end of the year, his wife, I should mention his wife, of course, did noble duty just being a wife to Parker, because she is clearly almost part of the furniture at the house, but she still loved him anyhow and wanted him to go to Florence, Italy, as had some of her friends and who had tuberculosis and recovered. Parker didn't want to go, but he did, and he did not, however, recover. And so he died there at age 49. And so at this time, before he got sick, the Boston Unitarian ministers got together to say, well, shall we send a card to Parker and wish him well? And yes, they seemed to agree they would. And then they said no. They got in a fight. Someone said, move adjournment. It was over. No card was sent. But so he died there. There were many people, Emerson, many of the Unitarians held a memorial service for him afterwards and had many good things to say. Also, at this time, there was another, I can wind up on another rather nice note about Parker. William, after Lincoln's death, William Herndon, his law partner, started writing a biography of Lincoln. And as he was going through the clippings, he found this clipping of a newspaper article that had been sent to Herndon and who forwarded it to Lincoln. And Parker had said, as he had in a number of sermons, what we need is a government of all the people, by all the people, and for all the people. And Lincoln had taken this and underscored these words. And he had done this right before the Gettysburg Address. And these were the words he used then in the Gettysburg Address, changing them something it's a little more, a little smoother, but also with a different connotation. So what made Parker great? Parker was great because he could do so much research. And he worked, as he said, often 17 hours a day, unbelievable. And then he could assimilate this. And then he could preach about it and preach so that everybody understood it. There was a case once where a woman invited her friend to hear Parker, and the friend said, I'm not into that sort of stuff. I don't want to go. You ought to go. No, back and forth. And so she finally decided to go. And when it was over, the guest said, I thought you said he was famous. And her host said, well, he is. And the guest said, but I understood everything he said. And it was that ability. That's what gave him the power, see, was the research, but making it so simple to transfer. And why Unitarians, I think, even themselves don't know a whole lot about Parker. He's not very readable. He published a lot, but he would never take the time, see, to write a polished essay like Emerson did. And people read Emerson still. But Parker, his writing is redundant and repetitious and so on. And so that's one reason we don't know as much about Parker as I think we should. And I hope you now will know a little bit more about Theodore Parker.
Thank you, Jim. Our benediction today is by Kimberly Quinn Johnson, who was inspired by the words of the poet June Jordan in her poem for South African women, which was read first at the UN. We are the ones we have been waiting for. We are not perfect, but we are perfectly fitted for this day. We are not without fault, but we can be honest to face our past as we chart a new future. We are the ones we have been waiting for. May we be bold and courageous to chart that new future. May we have faith in a future that is not known. We are the ones we have been waiting for. Go in peace and with a purpose.
The postlude today is going to be number 118, which is This Little Light of Mine. And the first verse, This Little Light of Mine, I'm gonna let it shine. Second verse, Everywhere I Go. Third verse is Building a New World. And then we'll end with This Little Light of Mine again.
This little light of mine.